It's incredibly important you be very specific. You need an ideal client profile, an ideal partner profile of where they're located, how big or small these channel partners are, what industries they specialize in, and then who the most important people are at these channel partner organizations, at these VARs, value-added resellers, managed service providers, MSPs, integrators. Who are the people, consultancies, who are the people at these companies that are most important for you to educate and build trust with, and what do they care about? Because when you understand in their own words what they care the most about, what their biggest goals and challenges are for these two different categories, perhaps three different categories of stakeholders, then you can go about building educational resources, website copywriting, educational events that are all about the things that your partners care about. Not what you care about, but what they care about. Because until you're educating and building trust with them, you have a very, very, very slim chance of getting much traction in your channel partner program. So that's your lead gen and your lead nurturing, so you can stay with channel partners throughout their journey when they're deciding what channel partner programs they want to bet basically their company's future. Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I want to very cordially welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. Regardless of where you sit on a go-to-market team, perhaps you're in sales, marketing, account management, product, channel partnerships, or perhaps you're the executive leader, the executive sponsor of the entire go-to-market motion, the entire go-to-market team, responsible for making sure that you have the right people sitting in the right seats, rowing the boat at the right speed, playing their instruments at the right tempo at the exact time, and in the right harmony to make all of this amazing growth happen in data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. Regardless of whether you're from a data center operator like a colocation, wholesale, hyperscale, edge, or modular provider. Perhaps you're from a technology company or a facilities related company that sells to or partners with data centers, or maybe your company does something related to construction or real estate, or you're an investor in data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. Or perhaps your company does something related to outsourced sales and marketing. But either way, if you're looking to level up, modernize your sales and marketing playbook, elevate your role within the growth of the data center industry, you are for sure in the right place. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you've been with us before on the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us. If you want to make sure that you stay up to date on new educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can sign up, you can subscribe directly on our website at dcsmi.com. And again, over at the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, we're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. So what's on the agenda for this week? We're going to first start by looking at how a data center design, infrastructure, and efficiency firm markets and sells with limited resources. After that, we'll turn our attention to how a data center solutions provider can grow its channel partner ranks. Next, we'll get into how to educate clients on edge data center latency benefits, the latency benefits of edge data centers. After that, we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, we will talk about how a data center network MSP can identify its ideal client profile, how an enterprise cloud migration and infrastructure optimization firm generates transformation clients. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll look at how to find data center customers that need high power density for their advanced computing needs, If you would have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address on an upcoming episode of the Data Center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A show, make sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching this from. So first up, how does a data center design infrastructure and efficiency firm market and sell with limited resources? So your business is basically does three things. You design data centers, you provide infrastructure, data center infrastructure, and you advise data center businesses, data center operators on efficiency, which is a big area kind of at the intersection of data center design and facilities management. So design infrastructure and efficiency, and you want to be able to market and sell with limited resources. What it largely comes down to is being very precise about who your ideal clients are. And the first thing that you'll want to get your mind around is when it comes to these three different lines of business, design, infrastructure, and efficiency, are you able to sell all three of these services to the exact same kinds of clients? Or do you find that you're selling these kinds of services to different kinds of clients? Aside from the basic life cycle issues that design tends to happen when a new facility is being constructed and commissioned, and perhaps redesign when there's a space that's being retrofitted or upgraded or something like that. But for the most part, that's pretty early on in the life cycle. Infrastructure can happen anytime. Efficiency audits, efficiency consulting can certainly happen anytime. But aside from those basic life cycle issues, is it largely the same client? If it's largely the same kind of clients, what we should see on your website is when we look at your logos and when we look at your case studies, a certain kind of pattern recognition. And within that pattern recognition, we should be able to find the consensus on where your company has been most successful, not only in marketing and selling, but also onboarding, servicing, retaining, and expanding that certain kind of client. And once we see that pattern recognition, if we're not able to see it in like the case studies on your website, if we don't see it on the logos on your website, then the next logical place we're usually going to look is your CRM, your customer relationship management system, to look for those commonalities. Because we need to, before we can talk about marketing and selling with limited resources, we have to get really, really precise about who we're going to market and sell to. So the first stop on that journey is your ideal client profile, your ICP. And for your ideal client profile, the single one-page document, we should know geographically, where are these clients located that need design, infrastructure, and efficiency consulting? Are they all located in the same metropolitan area? Or are they all located in the same state or province, the same region of a country? Are they all located within the same country, within the same nation, in the same group of countries, within the same continent? Or can you truly sell globally? So yes, first up, we need to be really, really specific on where you're able to market and sell those design, infrastructure, and efficiency services. Second, we need to know how big or how small those companies tend to be where you are most successful. In other words, like, what's the minimum size that a client needs to be able to afford your company's minimum across design, infrastructure, and efficiency services? And along the same lines, at what point does a client account get so large that it just is not a good fit for your current capabilities today? So be self-aware about that, come up with a range. Some people insist on this range being in square feet or square meters. Some people insist on it being in kilowatts or megawatts. The reality is, when it comes to marketing and selling, at some point, you're probably going to hit a prospecting database like LinkedIn, Sales Navigator, Campaign Manager, Zoom Info, Lucia, dozens of different kinds of prospecting databases. And nearly all of them run on a company size indicator that's aligned with number of employees. Some of them will give you an option for revenue or turnover. But for the most part, your safest bet universally is standardizing and normalizing that part of your ideal client profile based on a range for employee headcount, number of employees. The third area that's really important to get specific about with your ideal client profile is any kinds of industry specializations. Any place where you're ideally primed to be able to deliver world-class design, infrastructure, and efficiency consulting because of accreditations or certifications or staff that you have in place or professional development investments that you've made. So any particular vertical markets, niches, industries where you're primed to do exceptionally well. And along the same lines, are there certain kind of niches or specializations or industries that could come up where you're just not capable of currently being able to deliver great experience in that niche today. So those are specifically industries to include as well as specific industries to exclude. And it becomes especially relevant because in some of these areas, especially infrastructure and efficiency, probably designed to a certain degree as well, at the intersection of a certain geographic area, regulatory issues come up. And if it's not regulatory issues across the board, certainly regulatory issues come up in certain kinds of industries. Like, for example, in the United States, as in many regions of the world, there's unique regulatory issues that come up for data centers in financial services, in healthcare, in government, in education. There's a variety of different reasons why you want to get very specific about who you're including and who you're excluding from your ideal client profile when it comes to marketing and selling your data center design infrastructure and efficiency services. So if you want to be able to do this with limited resources, first invest some time, and it doesn't need to take a lot of time. Probably within an hour or two, you can get a lot of clarity on that single one-page ideal client profile. From there, you should be able to build out a target account list of the companies that you would love to have as future clients who meet the parameters of that ideal client profile. And then once we have clarity on who your ideal clients are, and anywhere from a couple dozen to maybe a couple thousand, usually somewhere in the middle, usually a couple hundred potential target accounts you want to market and sell to, then the next logical thing is within those companies, who do we need to be building relationships with? Who are the most important stakeholders that show up on those decision-making committees? And once we know those, we need to prioritize and rank who is the most important kind of stakeholder on that decision committee? Who is the second most important kind of stakeholder on that decision committee? One will be the primary buyer persona. The second most important will be your secondary buyer persona. Maybe there's even a third category, a tertiary buyer persona. And over time, you might also come across a negative buyer persona, where a certain kind of stakeholder that shows up and basically wants to derail your progress in this account, usually to protect their own turf for selfish reasons. So it's really, really important to not only know who you're going after at the account level, and potentially anywhere from a few dozen to a few thousand accounts that could be great future clients for your business that would need design, infrastructure, or efficiency, or perhaps all three of those at some point. And then within those accounts, who are the people? And once we know who the people are and we've prioritized who the people are that we need to educate and build trust with, then we need to do some research on what they care about. What's going on in their professional lives at the intersection of data center design, infrastructure, and efficiency that they're working on that's incredibly important. In other words, what's the consensus on their biggest goals in their own words? Not what we think those goals are, but what those goals actually are in their own words. How do we know what their own words are? Because we actually need to do the research. Face-to-face interviews, Zoom interviews, surveys, studying what shows up when they describe themselves on social media and search engines. We need to get the consensus on 10, 15, 20 people's biggest goals and know what comes up most frequently. And in addition to those biggest goals that they're working on individually, as a team and as a company, we need to know what they're struggling with the most. What are their biggest challenges? What are their biggest roadblocks? What's stressing them out to no end? What's screwing up their work-life balance, maybe even messing up their mental health? Certainly is interfering with their time away from the office to unplug and compromising their ability to really take true vacations. What's the consensus on those biggest stressors at the intersection of things that are at least tangentially related to data center design, infrastructure, and efficiency? And again, we need to know the consensus in their own words. Talk to 10, 15, 20 people or some kind of equivalent of that, like surveys, studying CRM records, studying search and social footprint, and get the consensus to figure out what's the biggest, the second biggest, the third biggest stress or challenge in their own words. And then we're going to repeat that exact same research with our secondary buyer persona, figuring out the consensus in their own words of their biggest goals, figuring out the consensus of their biggest challenges in their own words. And then and only then are we ready to start doing website copywriting. In other words, if you have a website that's up right now and there's a bunch of words on it and there's a bunch of images on it and there's a bunch of pictures on it, and that was done in a vacuum without doing buyer persona research, the first thing to test is if you can improve the relevancy and the impact of your website copywriting by improving your customer insight research, by improving these buyer personas, and making sure that you're prioritizing what they care about most, what your most important stakeholders care about most. Not what you care about, but what they care about in their own words. That gets infused into your website copywriting. That gets front and center with your product marketing. That goes front and center with your sales enablement, all of your email marketing, all your social media posts, all of your digital ads, all of your landing pages, all your conversion paths, all of your educational events, your offline events, your webinars, everything needs to take into account what you learn from this customer insight research if you truly want to be a customer centric, client centric company. And the path forward for a digital first buyer's journey where so much of the research is being done without you in the room, your content really stands in for what used to happen in face-to-face conversations. This is a really, really big deal. So I want to go back and make sure that we're crystal clear on this. 10 years ago, if I was answering this exact same question, what should a data center design infrastructure, an efficiency firm to do to market and sell with limited resources, you would have been able to enjoy an environment where your sales team got to spend about half of the sales cycle, half of the buyer's journey with your prospects and clients. 10 years ago, that number hovered around 56% of a typical journey was over before vendor contact, before sales contact, before someone was willing to take a meeting with someone from your sales team. That research way back when was done by CEB, the corporate executive board that merged into Gartner a few years back. The most recent research from Gartner now shows that number, that 56% number, has jumped all the way to 83%. What does that mean? By the time one of your prospects, one of your clients is finally ready to meet with an account executive or a sales development rep from your team, they've made up 83% of their mind. They're 83% of the way through their journey. How did we get from 56% to 83%? 10 years of digital transformation, a whole bunch of baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles, millions of people working from home in the part of the first couple of years of the early 2020s, and millions of people continuing to work from home. A lot of changes drove this digital-driven, self-propelled buyer's journey. What this means is by the time your prospects and clients get to you, they are experts. They've done tons of homework that changes the nature of who you hire, that changes how you invest in professional development and upskilling, workforce development, workforce redevelopment, cross-training, tremendously levels up on what you need to be successful there. What that also means is if you are trying to show up early, and often the only way you're going to get in now is by giving your sales team, your marketing team, all of your client-facing team members a massive makeover. So instead of being seen by their traditional job roles that are focused on a transaction, getting someone on the deal board as quickly as possible, getting that deal to progress to closed won, WON, as rapidly as possible, those days are gone. The only way that we're going to get you in to educate and build trust now is by taking the members of your client-facing team and repositioning them so that they're able to show up as teachers, as consultants, as subject matter experts, and perhaps even trusted advisors. That's what this is all about, educating and building trust. And some of your really seasoned members on your teams may be even able to be seen as thought leaders. This is how we get in early and often. This is how you stay relevant to the way that modern buyers navigate their journey when it comes to making decisions around data center design, infrastructure, and efficiency. If you think about the typical journey where there's 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, most companies in and around data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure are only showing up in the very late stages of the journey. How do we know that? Because they're spending 90% of their budget on activities that people are only going to listen to if they're ready to talk with a salesperson. What are these activities? Massive expenses at global and national conferences, massive sponsorships. And it's a ton of fun to be able to have these great cabana parties and golf tournaments and all these great experiences. But at the end of the day, are you really educating and building trust with the people that are attending? And is that going to stick with them long enough so it replaces those other couple dozen touch points where you're not currently showing up? Seems pretty far-fetched. The reality is, once that conference is over, even if you decide you're going to repeat that exact same playbook 362 days later, you have very, very little control over when that primary, when that secondary buyer persona all of a sudden decides to make their initiative a priority. And if you're banking on them waiting another 362 days till they see you the next time, you're leaving your company incredibly vulnerable to the self-driven buyer's journey, where whoever they get the answers from, whoever is teaching them how to navigate that process, how to evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them when it comes to data center design, infrastructure, and efficiency, they're the ones that are educating and building trust. They're the ones that are in a position to say, hey, I saw you registered for upcoming webinar, upcoming lunch and learn. But we know when it comes to design, infrastructure, and efficiency, it takes a village. Typically, people are involved from commissioning, from finance, from construction, from facilities management. So with that in mind, who else from your team would also benefit from attending? This is how you get to meet the entire decision committee, or at least a big part of the decision committee, where there's still time to shape how they evaluate the different options that are in front of them. If you sit this out, if you arrogantly say, you know what, we've been here a long time, you're not going to tell us that we need to change our playbook from 10 years ago. We're going to tell the industry how it's done. You're going to be swimming a very, very, very uphill battle. And again, leave yourself incredibly vulnerable to companies that are a lot more in tune with buyer preferences. So if you haven't updated your customer insight research in a while to understand who they are, what they care about, what's driving them nuts, and how they're learning today, you may be in for a pretty rude awakening. So with all of that in mind, what does this argue for shifting your resources into? A context where you're over and over and over again encouraging your best prospects and clients to learn with your client-facing team members and learn together, where multiple members from the same company are coming together to learn from your experts. That's what indoctrinates. That's what gets them to see your way of looking at this category. That's what gets them to see your team as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center design, infrastructure, and efficiency. And frankly, for most companies, this is going to be the only path forward unless you're able to lean on like a Fortune 50 or Fortune 500 brand that already has billions or trillions in brand equity in the marketplace. Without that, the best way to democratize, the way to level the playing field on all of this stuff when it comes to marketing and selling with limited resources is you need to out-personalize. You need to out-customize. Having these amazing educational resources, these amazing educational events and experiences that position your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts on anything and everything having to do with data center design, infrastructure, and efficiency, not for boiling the whole ocean, but for your specific ideal client profile, for a certain region, for certain company sizes, in certain industries, and with certain kinds of stakeholders. That's where you are primed to win. These are big culture changes for most companies. If your company has fewer than 1,000 employees, if you have anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred employees, for sure, your CEO needs to be involved as the internal champion to drive this cultural change in most companies. Because 9 times out of 10, it comes from a place of your CEO getting fed up with hearing from their sales leaders, their account management leaders across the board that they're tired of prospects and clients treating you and your colleagues like crap. They're tired of people talking down to you. You're tired of the condescension. You're tired of being ghosted. You're tired of being jerked around. You're tired of being lied to. All of those things, you know you're better than that. And it's incredibly important for the path forward for the industry to know that you're better than that. And the way you're going to demonstrate that going forward is by showing up as the best teachers, the best educators, the best subject matter experts, the best thought leaders, the best consultants when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center design, infrastructure, and efficiency. So that's how it would approach how a data center design infrastructure and efficiency firm can market and sell with limited resources. Okay, what do we got? Next question up. By the way, if you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales Marketing Q&A show so far, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you have an idea for a future topic that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, be sure to add that in the comments wherever you're watching. Next question up is, how does a data center solution provider grow its channel partners? How does a data center solutions provider grow its channel partners? That is a fantastic question. So a data center solutions provider may be operating in more than one segment within the data center ecosystem. So if we think about like data center operators and data center end users, and then there's data center technology companies, a data center facilities company, a facilities related company, there's construction, there's real estate, there's investment companies, and there's outsourced sales and marketing companies. Typically, a data center solutions provider integrates multiple areas from a technology stack, multiple areas from a facility stack, and a big part of the value that they're providing for data center operators, for data center end users, is their ability to understand a problem, propose a solution, and bring together a lot of different pieces and parts and make it all work together with a single point of contact with accountability on all of that for making it work together. So you're operating across a minimum of two different segments, through 2 or 3 different segments within the data center ecosystem, and you want to grow your channel partner ranks. I think a big part of what limits people from being more successful with their channel partner ecosystem is, first, unrealistic expectations as to how quickly it's going to move, and second, drastically underfunding, drastically under timelining the whole thing. So let's dig into each of those. So if we think about the evolution of a company having a successful channel partner program, there's really 2 big prerequisites that need to happen before your company is ready to roll out a channel partner program. First, and most people that are listening to this live stream will be at the stage where they've at least achieved this. You've achieved product market fit. Product market fit is the degree to which you know exactly who your ideal clients are, exactly the products or services they purchase, those that they purchase from your firm, the prices that they pay, the terms, the duration, and all the basic unit economics. Things like if you sell on a recurring basis, if it's a managed service, then it would be like monthly or annually MRR, monthly recurring revenue, or ARR, annually recurring revenue. It could be average client lifetime value, often abbreviated LTV. It could be knowing your client acquisition costs, sometimes called CAC or CAC, also sometimes known as COCA, your cost of client acquisition, knowing your average sales cycle length. In other words, you have a lot of clarity on who you're selling to, exactly what they buy, and how all the numbers and the ratios work. And typically you'll know you hit that because when we look at the case studies section on your website, you see it's almost so straightforward that as an external party, I can look at that and back into what your ideal client profile is just by seeing the commonalities among your case studies. That's how we know we have go-to-market fit. Typically, the next step beyond that, when a company is like at a startup phase, starting to get funded and growing, is they grow beyond founder-led sales. They get to the point where it's not practical for a founder or co-founder of the company to be the only one selling, and they hire their first sales team. So they hire account executives, they may hire a sales development rep, they may hire a sales manager, or VP of sales, or something like that. But they've successfully gotten past the point where someone besides a founder of the company can sell. And for some of you that are watching this, you may have a relatively small sales team. For some of you that are watching this, you may have a massive sales team where your annual SKO, your annual sales kickoff, takes place in a stadium or in a large auditorium because there's so many people that need to get trained. But that tells us that you have go-to-market fit, meaning that as additional capital is deployed into your company, an investor knows, or whoever is putting this capital in, that they put $1 million, 10 million, 100 million in, and they can expect a certain amount of predictability in what happens next with growing your leads, sales opportunities, new clients, and revenue sources. So that's go-to-market fit, which is the next step after product market fit. In order to have a successful channel partner program, we're looking for evidence that you've achieved channel partner fit. What is channel partner fit or partner market fit? PMF, not to be confused with product market fit. So channel partner market fit or partner market fit is the degree to which you have successfully hired one or more team members from your company that has the word channel or partner in their job title. In some cases, maybe a handful of people, depending on the size of your company. It could be dozens of people that run this channel related organization. And you have successfully recruited, onboarded, trained, and had channel partners that are having success in your program on a prolonged basis with bringing in new clients, collecting sales compensation, being able to sell additional services revenue. And they're thrilled enough that they're now making your channel partner program a steady part, a regular part, a permanent part of their business. And the reason that this inherently takes longer than getting to go-to-market fit and scaling up a sales team is your account, when you hire full-time account executives, when you hire full-time account managers, when you hire full-time sales development reps, they're working exclusively for your company or nearly exclusively, probably anywhere from 40, 50, 60 hours a week or so on average. When you're recruiting a channel partner, they typically belong to multiple channel partner programs. What this means is they're splitting their attention among all of the different partner programs that they belong to. And this is where it tends to take longer. And people ignoring the reality that it tends to take longer, a lot of times are setting themselves up for failure. Because when a small managed service provider, a small network integrator, or even a large network integrator, evaluated reseller, managed service provider decides to be your partner, it's very, very unlikely that you are the only channel partner relationship that they have. You may not even be the only channel partner relationship that they have in your category as a data center solutions provider. So with that in mind, it takes longer to market and sell and onboard them. And remember, just like a recurring revenue as a service kind of business, onboarding a new channel partner program is just a new starting line, because now you need to activate and enable them and motivate them to go introduce what you do to all of their current and future clients forever. Because if they're not motivated to do that, because if you haven't successfully onboarded them and educated and built trust with them, they're not going to become an extension of your sales team. They're not going to become an extension of your services team. So it inherently is a longer play. But if you do this right, you will have channel partners that may have significantly more longevity with your company than a lot of your employees. I think a big part of the reason why companies like Microsoft and Dell have persevered over the decades is because they've made their channel partner ecosystem a massive focus. Microsoft has really never, ever swayed from that in the history of its company going back decades. Dell in the early years, in the 1990s, could tell you a story sometime about the one time I met Michael Dell where he reaffirmed this. But in the 1990s, they were legendary for running ads in printed newspapers, the thing that came before the web, with a big pair of scissors to cut out the middleman, because they didn't want to have channel partners. And eventually in the early 2000s, they relented on that. They've built a very successful channel partner ecosystem. And again, like many companies like Dell, Microsoft, Cisco, I don't know where they would be if they didn't make those significant investments in both training and certification programs, as well as channel partner support over the years. Where a lot of people get messed up is in relatively early stage companies. There's a lot of ego and arrogance that thinks that just because these huge industry leaders have been able to pull these things off over the years, that they're going to be able to pull this off as a brand new startup because maybe someone from their team used to work at a company like that. But what they're ignoring is the massive amount of resources that got a company like that to that stage. So what I would encourage you to do to grow your channel partner ranks is not only have appropriate staffing and expectations, a timeline, but to treat your channel partners as another tiered go-to-market playbook. In other words, in the same way that a direct traditional sales force needs a go-to-market strategy and an ideal client profile and a set of buyer personas and a content calendar and events calendar to support lead generation, lead nurturing, opportunity generation, sales process. That's for a traditional direct model, regardless of whether you're selling to small and medium-sized businesses, mid-market, or enterprise. In addition to that, you really need a completely separate go-to-market playbook and marketing and sales resources and set of buyer personas and target partner account list, in the same way you'd have a target account list, target partners, anywhere from a couple dozen to a few thousand partners that you think would be amazing channel partners for your company. You need that exact same infrastructure and that exact same go-to-market philosophy around studying the biggest goals and the biggest challenges of your most important one or two categories of channel partners that you want to be able to recruit, because it is a long game. You need to market and educate and build trust with channel partners that have likely not ever heard of your company. Because frankly, if they had already heard of your company, you would already have a channel organization, you would have a channel chief, and frankly, you wouldn't be coming to the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute for your advice on how to get a brand new channel partner program off the ground or how to scale and grow your initial channel partners. You would already have amazing internal resources that are doing this at scale. You'd be on the CRN list of the top channel programs. Your leaders would be on the channel chiefs, recognized by big industry trade publications like that. But let's talk about the complete other end of the range, companies that are aspiring to have this amazing channel partner growth plan. It's incredibly important that you be very specific. You need an ideal client profile, an ideal partner profile of where they're located, how big or small these channel partners are, what industries they specialize in, and then who the most important people are at these channel partner organizations, at these VARs, value-added resellers, managed service providers, MSPs, integrators. Who are the people, consultancies, who are the people at these companies that are most important for you to educate and build trust with, and what do they care about? Because when you understand in their own words what they care the most about, what their biggest goals and challenges are for these two different categories, perhaps three different categories of stakeholders, then you can go about building educational resources, website copywriting, educational events that are all about the things that your partners care about, not what you care about, but what they care about. Because until you're educating and building trust with them, you have a very, very, very slim chance of getting much traction in your channel partner program. So that's your lead gen and your lead nurturing, so you can stay with channel partners throughout their journey when they're deciding what channel partner programs they want to bet basically their company's future on. Then they become onboarded, and then you need a whole separate playbook. Sometimes this moves from channel account managers to channel consultants or something like that. If you're a big enough channel partner, or if you're a smaller size channel partner, you're probably using a lot of one-to-many resources like on-demand video training and certification, on-demand webinars, in-person classroom training, all of these things that help you scale your channel partner programs. But the same kind of resources that you make available for your own employees in sales and your own employees in customer success and your own employees in customer support, your channel partners need a version of that as well. I've had the good fortune over the course of my career to work on a lot of different channel partner, channel enablement kind of initiatives. And I can tell you without a doubt that if you don't make these investments to show your channel partners that you're serious about helping to grow together, they're going to find someone else in your category that's going to demonstrate that that company is way more serious about enabling and supporting its channel partners the right way, so that you don't embarrass them in front of their clients. Again, they're betting their reputation on you. So if you are serious about growing your channel partners, it's really important that you have a culture in place that plays the long game with this. If you have a C-level sales executive, you need a C-level channel partner executive. If you have a C-level marketing executive, you need a C-level channel partner executive. It is that important, because if you're pushing this down to a mid-level person with unrealistic resources, unrealistic timelines, you're going to fail before you even get out of the gate. But your channel partner playbook needs the exact kind of go-to-market. It needs marketing resources. It needs sales resources. It needs onboarding. It needs enablement. It needs support. But the good news is you can have amazing unit economics on the longevity, on the lifetime value of a client partner, of a channel partner relationship. In many cases, much, much longer than you're even experiencing with your own internal sales and services resources. So these are all the things that you should be thinking about, especially in a world, in a self-driven buyer's journey, where so much of the research and decision-making happens without you in the room. And your channel partners, your ecosystem, their platform, the access that they get for you to be in front of thousands of little, or at least hundreds of these tiny little niches that are just not cost effective for you to go after, is amazingly, amazingly impactful. And of course, it's shifting fixed costs over to variable costs. That's why your CFOs, that's why your boards tend to love the idea of having a channel partner program. But it's not going to happen overnight. It takes some serious thought. And if you're really serious as a data center solutions provider about growing your channel partner program, these are the considerations that you should be thinking about with playing the long game. So what do we have up for our next question? By the way, if you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button. So next question up is, how do we educate clients on edge data center latency benefits? How do we educate clients on edge data center latency benefits? Your company is an edge data center provider, and you want to make sure that your prospects and clients understand the latency benefits that you provide. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So in order to make sure that we knock it out of the park with education and trust building around the latency benefits that are unique, that differentiate your company in the edge data center space, let's get really specific about who they are first. Let's get your ideal client profile in good shape. Let's know, because edge, by definition, is very, very, very closely aligned to geography, right? So there's two different, both with edge and colocation operators, you have one very important thing in mind, is that when it comes to your marketing and sales, you will almost certainly need a hyper-local playbook, and you'll also need a long-distance playbook, a virtual playbook. The hyper-local playbook is very relevant to prospects and clients that can get in the car and be at your facility, your edge facility or your colo facility, or whatever the case is, within like a 30 or 60-minute drive. For anyone that is located substantially further away than a 30 or 60-minute drive, they need a different kind of playbook, because for an edge data center provider, if you have a conference room, if you have a classroom in your facility or adjacent where you can hold great educational events, that's a really, really important part of your playbook for educating, for schooling your most important buyer personas on those latency benefits. Let's get really specific about who they are geographically, because again, hyperlocal should be focusing on getting as many people as possible into your facility to learn with your client-facing team members and tour so you can show them the benefits and demonstrate the latency benefits firsthand. If you don't have that advantage because you're also doing a long-distance playbook, which is very, very common, a lot of the big part of what makes edge data centers and their latency benefits, as well as the governance benefits, such a big hit, is that someone that's in, say, Asia Pacific says they need an edge location in a certain area of downtown Seattle, Washington, or downtown Miami, Florida, or metro, the center of London, or something like that. And it's usually with edge, it's incredibly specific. Like a big data center operator may have 5 or 10 facilities in a metro area, but an edge buyer, they've zeroed in on just one of those facilities. That's how hyper-specific the location tends to be. So you need a playbook where instead of hosting educational events like once a month in a conference room or classroom, you're doing the same thing, but virtually. So webinars, live streams, on demand, email, social, YouTube, podcasts, all of that good stuff. And in order to make sure that you're addressing the latency benefits in terms that matter most, after you've defined that ideal client profile, so you know geographically where they're located, how big or small those buyers tend to be in terms of their number of employees, their headcount, and specific industries they tend to be located in, because even with edge, compliance, accreditation, certifications can become relevant when you look at the intersection of a certain geographic area and a certain industry or vertical market or niche or something like that. Once you've nailed that ideal client profile, then you want to get specific about companies, potential clients that could fit that ideal client profile, that's your target account list powering your ABM, your account-based marketing. And then within those accounts, who are the 1 or 2 or 3 different kinds of people that you want to educate and build trust with about your latency benefits. And it's not enough to just talk about the latency benefits, because in many cases, your prospects and clients aren't going to be ready for a conversation about latency benefits till they're likely about halfway through their buyer's journey. And it's so important that we grab them by the virtual short collar, we pull them in, we intercept them as early as possible. So if we're just talking about latency benefits, we're leaving your company incredibly vulnerable to a company, to a competitor of yours, a direct or indirect competitor of yours, or a non-business model competitor of yours, who was able to get in much earlier because they better understood what's going on in that person's world. So starting with your most important category of stakeholders for your edge data center services, that's your primary buyer persona. We need to know their biggest goals and their biggest challenges in their own words, not what you think those words are, but what those words actually are, and in the consensus on that. And we want to do the same thing for our second most important category of edge data center stakeholders. And perhaps if there's a third, that would be your tertiary buyer persona. And what you learn from that customer insight research, what you learn from building out and documenting that buyer persona, that's incredibly important for your website copywriting, for your product marketing, for your sales enablement, for your educational content calendar, for your educational events. Because the goal is to know, in their own words, their biggest professional goals that they need to achieve individually, as a team, and as a company, and their biggest stressors, their biggest struggles when it comes to anything and everything that's directly or indirectly related to edge data centers. And when you can show up as the best teacher, consultant, subject matter expert, trusted advisor, perhaps even thought leader about anything and everything having to do with a very specific kind of buyer, specific kind of job function in a certain geographic area for a certain company size and certain kind of industries with amazingly helpful educational resources, you'll earn your way in early and often. And the early is just as important as often. A typical journey for most things in and around edge data centers, you can count on about 25 to 30, like 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. And your goal is to understand so well what's going on in their world that your best buyer personas, your most important stakeholders in these companies, are highly motivated to want to spend a lot of time with your client-facing team members learning in a professional development mode. So you have a massive chance to be able to shape how they evaluate and look at all of the different competitive options that are in front of them. And they keep coming back over and over again. And when you say, gee, I see you've registered for our upcoming webinar on edge data center best practices for mid-market manufacturing IT executives. But when it comes to edge, it takes a village. There's typically people involved in infrastructure and operations and cybersecurity and finance. So with that in mind, who else should attend this event? Who else should be watching this webinar? Who else should watch this video, watch this podcast? You'd be shocked that simple email marketing automation that you've been able to do like for 10, 20 years, how amazingly impactful it can be in getting you in front of the decision committee before you even know who the members are in the decision committee. And you start to figure that out because you look at your lead generation email notifications, you look in your CRM, whether the stuff is piling up, and you start to see, it's really interesting. For our webinar that's coming up next Thursday, 6 people from the same company just registered in the last hour. They're talking about us. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. They're registered to come to our event. Even if only half of them come to our event, we're going to have 3 stakeholders from one of our target accounts hanging on our every word, having our smartest people in our company talk about all the issues that they should be thinking about when it comes to finding the right edge data center company to partner with, to sign on for, to bet their company around. It is amazingly, amazingly impactful when you get this right. So when it comes to educating clients on your edge data center latency benefits, realize that latency benefits may be step 2 or step 3 or much further along on those 28 touch points somewhere along that buyer's journey. The mistake that a lot of people make is they assume that the edge data center latency benefits is the first date. What if it was the second date or the 5th date or the 11th date and you were messing it up? You were missing out because you were thinking that everyone immediately that's a perfect fit for your edge data center wants to right away talk about latency benefits. No, we need to understand what's going on in their world, their biggest goals and challenges, and start there. And then over time, there will be a very natural progression, at which point we can say, yeah, and that's the reason why this also becomes a really important factor when we're talking about latency benefits. But if you're thinking about a content calendar for a webinar series or a breakfast seminar series or lunch and learn series or a series of videos or series of podcasts, it's possible that latency is like number 3 or 4 or 7 on your list of Roman numerals on your table of contents that you want to cover. And there's some much more natural progressions that'll intercept a much bigger part of the funnel much, much earlier on. So that's what I would be thinking about when it comes to educating clients on edge data center latency benefits, is starting with where they are. You'll have an idea of where you want them to be somewhere around the middle of the journey, thinking about your unique differentiation around latency benefits. But we need to intercept them where they are based on who they are and what they care about, not what you'd like them to care about in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but what we know for sure they care about today. That's how your company can do exceptionally well with your go-to-market when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to attracting and educating and building trust with your future edge data center clients. We're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. When we come back, we have 3 more exciting questions and challenges to tackle.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of go-to-market sales and marketing professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And if you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have an idea for a topic, a question, a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, in an upcoming episode, make sure to leave that in the comments wherever you are watching. So what's up next? How does a data center MSP, a data center managed service provider, identify the ideal client profile? How can a data center MSP, a data center managed service provider, identify its ideal client profile? So there's 2 scenarios where this question tends to come up. One is if you're a brand new managed service provider just starting up, then you're going to have a best guess or a hypothesis, usually based on the founder or the founding team's background and working with certain kinds of clients, certain kind of companies earlier on in their career, in their previous jobs. For most established MSPs, most established managed service providers, you'll be needing to look for some pattern recognition. In other words, where have you been most successful in the past? And that usually is evidenced by your logos, your case studies, and we're looking for what they have in common. And if we can't find evidence of that there, we should for sure find evidence of your most successful clients sitting in your CRM, your customer relationship management system, or your PSA, your professional services automation platform, like ConnectWise or Autotask or something like that. If you're using a system like that, or using a more traditional CRM and support system, maybe something from HubSpot or Salesforce or Zendesk or something like that. But we need to see what those folks, what your best clients have in common, who are the most profitable, who's been with you the longest, who has the highest net promoter score. Where do they tend to be located? We know with a managed service provider, especially working in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities, a lot of times proximity is incredibly important. I actually know of some managed service providers in the data center space that are in the business of selling remote hands to people that don't have proximity in certain geographic areas. So yeah, the geographic part of your ideal client profile is incredibly important to figure out where they're located, because that's going to have bearing on how you staff up for sales and services, especially services, and may have bearing for how you localize your content, how you localize your ads, how you do your outbound. So figure out geographically where your ideal clients are located. Second, how big or how small are they? This is a huge issue for managed service providers as well. Having worked with thousands of managed service providers over the last 20, 25 years or so, there's definitely a minimum size that most MSPs want their clients to be able to afford their company's minimums. In other words, at 5 employees, at 10 employees, can they really afford your minimum level of engagement, your minimum offering? And at a certain size, are they so large that it's far more likely that they're just going to do in-house with what you offer on an outsourced basis? So for a lot of data center managed service providers, that range may be like anywhere from 10 employees up to 500 employees or something like that in a specific geographic area. But with the ideal client profile, we're not done when we have geographic parameters and when we have company size parameters based on employee headcount nailed down. We also need to take into account industry. Why is industry especially important? Well, there's certain industries that'll spend more on managed services than others. There's certain that you may be incredibly well positioned to market, sell, and service within, and others where you may be instantly disqualified because you don't have the training or the credentials or the LinkedIn profiles or resumes to support working in that kind of industry. So when it comes to your ideal client profile, what a managed service provider should be thinking about that's specializing in data center networking is where their clients are located geographically, how big or how small they are in terms of headcount, in terms of the number of employees that they have, and industry range. From there, from that ideal client profile, you should be able to build out a target account list of anywhere from a couple dozen to, at the upper end of the range, maybe a few thousand, usually somewhere in the middle there, of ideal clients that fit that profile that you'd love to have doing business with your company. And then once you have that ideal client profile documented and you've built out your target account list, then based on your sweet spot, based on your ideal clients, think about who the most important stakeholders are in those companies that you want to market and sell to, that you want to educate and build trust with. The most important you'll call like your primary buyer persona. The second most important you might call a secondary buyer persona. The kind of stakeholder that shows up and they derail everything that's going on, you'll probably call a negative buyer persona. And all of these, the targeting parameters in their ideal client profile, the target account list for account-based marketing, the definition of your buyer personas will have a tremendous bearing in your go-to-market strategy, in your content strategy, in your educational event strategy, how you do outbound, how you do ads, how you do prospecting, how you do qualification, how you run your sales process, how you segment things on your website, what your website navigation looks like, what the drop-down lists look like, what your segment lists in your CRM, your customer relationship management needs to look like. But at a most basic level, that's what I would be thinking about for how a data center networking managed service provider, a managed service provider specializing in data center networking, can identify its ideal client profile is simply look at the pattern recognition of where you've been most successful in the past as a template, as a blueprint for where you want to go next with your growth. And then once you're really specific on that ideal client profile, once you're really specific on the target account list, on the buyer personas, then you can set goals like a revenue growth goal and figure out, okay, I want so much new revenue in the next 12 months. And the average client, based on historical patterns, is going to spend this amount. So if I take the total revenue goal by how much money an average client spends with us, then I'll know how many new clients that we need to bring on and retain. Depending on what your churn rate is, you may need to add more than you bring on to replenish those that are leaving. And then from the number of new clients that you have, you look at your historical close rate, how many sales opportunities that you need to get those new clients to both add new clients and replenish any churning clients. And then from sales opportunities, you look at your historical rate of leads that convert to sales opportunities, and you basically figure out how many early and middle stage leads your company needs to be generating to hit your revenue growth goal over the next year. So that's a quick playbook to be thinking about for how a data center networking MSP can identify its ideal client profile. Okay, what do we got? Next question. How can an enterprise cloud migration and infrastructure organization firm generate transformation clients? So your company provides enterprise cloud migration and infrastructure optimization, and you want to be able to generate clients that are looking for transformation services specific to enterprise cloud migration and infrastructure optimization. So the best way to generate those clients is to figure out where you've been most successful so far with your business. Because chances are, if you're that dialed into those two categories of services, cloud migration and optimizing infrastructure, you likely have had some success so far. If this is a brand new startup, you're more than likely going to look at where your founding team has had success so far. And from that, we want to be able to build an ideal client profile. So we know geographically where these clients are located. And there's a couple of interesting issues that are unique to cloud and unique to infrastructure optimization that definitely affect the geographic part of your ideal client profile more so than other parts of the data center ecosystem. Where this is especially relevant is governance issue, data sovereignty issues, because there's a lot in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about as different parts of the world regulate IT differently, that there's unique expertise that you will need to have, that your company will need to have in terms of certifications and accreditations to be able to do business in these particular regions effectively for those kinds of clients, that enterprise clients that need cloud migration and need infrastructure optimization. So geographically, where can you successfully market, sell, and service both cloud migration and infrastructure optimization? Second, how big or small are these clients? And again, only you can define this based on where you've been most successful in the past. The where you've been most successful in the past typically is showing up on a case studies page, on a logos in your CRM. So what kind of company, how big do they need to be to afford your minimum level of engagement? How big would they be before they could outgrow you? In other words, what's so large that it's far more likely that they're going to hire these kinds of services internally for cloud migration and infrastructure optimization? So what's the range? We're not going to get into kilowatts. We're not going to get, or megawatts. We're not going to get into square footage or square meters. We just want to know for a prospecting database like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, LinkedIn Campaign Manager, Zoom Info, or something like that. What's the minimum number of employees that an ideal client needs to have? What's the maximum amount of clients where they would likely outgrow you and would become such a more complex marketing and sales and services engagement that your company may not be geared up to deal with that today? And then, especially when it comes to cloud migration and infrastructure optimization, geographic location at the intersection of industries often requires additional skills, additional accreditations, additional certifications. So it could be healthcare. It could be an across the board regulatory issue. It could be healthcare. It could be financial services. It could be education. It could be government. But there for sure are certain industries that your company, that your firm could be especially well suited for selling into for enterprise cloud migration and infrastructure optimization. And there may be others where you just simply don't have the capabilities and you want to specifically exclude those and have them show up on drop-down lists and filtering criteria, drop-down lists on your website and filtering lists in your CRM and exclusion lists on your outbound campaigns and ad campaigns. So you're working as efficiently as possible. So geographically, we need to know where you're going to be successful, how big or how small these companies are, and certain kinds of industries. From there, you should be able to build out a target account list, but we're not done yet. A big part, especially when it comes to enterprises, is being able to map that org chart. Who is on the decision committee and what do they care about? And the best way to tackle this is to think about buyer personas. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of a kind of stakeholder that's incredibly core to your success as a business. And it's based on actual research and some educated speculation. The actual research, a lot of times, is where companies will try to take shortcuts that can come back to bite them in the behind. What are these shortcuts? Well, you certainly can talk to some of your internal team members who've been with your company or been in this business model in this space a long time, that have been working in cloud migration and infrastructure optimization for several years. But I would caution you to take that internal input as maybe 20, 25% of the puzzle. And most of the research, 75, 80% of the research, should come from talking directly with those particular buyer personas, the prioritized segments of stakeholders that matter most to your company's success. The most important segment we'll call your primary buyer persona. The second most important segment we'll call your secondary buyer persona. In an enterprise, it's very likely that there's 3 or more segments. So you could have a tertiary buyer persona. You may have a negative buyer persona where they show up, it's the kiss of death to them trying to derail your engagement. But we need to know, at least on your primary and secondary, what their biggest goals and challenges are in their own words when it comes to anything and everything having to do with enterprise cloud migration and digital infrastructure optimization. Not what we think those words are, but what those words actually are. So that's going to come from face-to-face interviews, video interviews, surveys, studying their CRM, their contact timeline, what they say, all the notes in your CRM, as well as the search and social footprint that that person leaves behind when you look them up on LinkedIn and Google and ChatGPT and places like that, of specifically how they're describing themselves and the kind of content that they engage with, the kind of watering holes and resources that they use to learn about cloud migrations and digital infrastructure optimization. And once you have that, you're in a great position to come up with better website copywriting, better positioning, better messaging, more relevant product marketing, more relevant sales enablement resources, better email marketing, better digital ads, all of the above that are incredibly important for growing your pipeline, growing your lead generation, improving your lead nurturing, educating and building trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So you and your client-facing team members are seen as the be-all end-all expert when it comes to anything and everything having to do with enterprise cloud migration and digital infrastructure optimization for this kind of stakeholder in this geographic region at a company of roughly this size in certain kind of industries. So I'm not telling you to go head to head with like a Fortune 500 company and try to boil the ocean. We need to get a lot more specific about who they are and what they care about so you can really, really dial in what you're doing with positioning, with competitive positioning, with educational resources, with lead generation, with sales cycle acceleration, with sales enablement, and knocking it out of the park with growing this. So these are some of the considerations that I would be thinking about when it comes to how an enterprise cloud migration and infrastructure optimization firm can generate transformation clients. If you've gotten good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you have an idea for a topic, a challenge, or question that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, make sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching. And that brings us to our final question in this week's show, which is, how do we find data center customers that need high power density for advanced computing? How do we find data center customers that need that value, high power density for advanced computing? So what this means more than likely is you're either a data center developer or a data center operator that has a huge competitive advantage, that you have a facility that has high power density intended for advanced computing, and you want to find the ideal clients who value that tremendously, who need that tremendously. So what do we do to do that? There's a couple of different playbooks, but what it largely comes down to is, have you been successful? Have you been successful before in selling advanced computing? Have you been successful before in selling AI related applications, those kind of workloads, those kind of supercomputing kind of workloads? If you have, then you probably already have some pattern recognition of what shows up in your ideal client profile, like where these clients tend to be located, how big or small they are, what kind of industries they tend to be located in, and who are the key stakeholders. If you don't, as a first 1.0 version of your go-to-market playbook, there's definitely some places that you could start from as building this pipeline, as building these kind of customers. Usually the words that I tend to hear are people want blue chip customers, want logo customers, anchor tenants. Those are all well and good, but we need to get more specific if we're going to go after those kinds of accounts. So usually what it comes down to is there's 3 or 4 categories of clients, 3 or 4 categories of tenants, leaseholders, whatever you want to call them, that makes sense for that kind of environment. First, there could be operators that are subcontracting out, subleasing space within your facility as an extension of their overall data center footprint. The second category can be end users. These are enterprise IT organizations that are making heavy duty investments in advanced computing, and they're talking about it a lot. Hyperscalers are probably the biggest category, where there's a couple dozen of those to go after aggressively, but there's a lot of other enterprise IT organizations within large companies that are pretty well funded that are going all in on advanced computing. That would also drive some adjustments to your ideal client profile in terms of where they're located, their company size, and certain kinds of industries that are especially well suited to making big investments in advanced computing. So is it financial services? Is it healthcare? Is it government? Is it manufacturing? Is it retail, e-commerce? It could be all of the above. Is it academia? It depends on where your firm, where your facilities are well suited to win. In a lot of cases, it could be a certification or accreditation that makes you especially primed to do this, or especially not primed to do this. It could be a latency benefit that you have by proximity. It could be a governance benefit that you have because you're located in a certain geographic region that's especially beneficial for certain kinds of advanced computing applications. So if you think about, there's an operator play, there's a hyperscaler play, there's an enterprise IT play, and there may be a channel partner play for channel partners that are tending to work on advanced computing kind of initiatives, like integrators or managed service providers that are specializing in those areas. So those are the 4 broad segments, the 4 parts of your ideal client profile, 4 potential buyer personas to build out and understand their biggest goals and challenges when it comes to anything and everything having to do with needing high power density for advanced computing. And the goal, as with all data center related go-to-market playbooks, is we need to get in there as early as possible and as often as possible. So by better understanding, if we think that looking for a solution around advanced computing may be step 3, it may be step 7, it may be step 13 among the 28 touch points that happen between complete stranger and purchase decision, we need to understand what are the leading indicators that someone that's from an operator or hyperscaler or a channel partner or enterprise data center would be looking for, that's a leading indicator that they're anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months away from needing to make a huge investment in and around advanced computing. And the way we figure that out is we do our customer insight research. We build out those buyer personas. And when we get consensus in their own words on their biggest goals and challenges, then we set about building amazing digital content that stands in for the first 83% of the buyer's journey, where we don't have face-to-face interaction anymore. We need these digital assets to do the heavy lifting for us. 10 years ago, we were in there half of the time. Those days are long, long gone in the rearview mirror. You're selling by very definition when it comes to advanced computing. You're selling to a highly technical buyer. You're selling to someone that's very skeptical and cynical, that's not a big fan of sales and marketing. So the way we earn our way in is we need to get rid of the traditional transaction-focused playbook that's just very focused on your own selfish needs. And we need to get into what they care most about, what's top of mind for them, and how we can get your client-facing team members to show up as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with high power density for advanced computing for this specific kind of buyer in a specific geographic region and a specific company size and a specific kind of niche. And the better job we can do with giving a massive makeover to our account executives and sales development reps and marketers and account managers and product and channel folks to instead show up more as teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, and subject matter experts, the more likely it is that the most important stakeholders in these companies are going to be super interested in learning from your client-facing team members, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for them to show up in learning mode, in professional development mode, where we have a massive opportunity to shape how they navigate this journey towards advanced computing. And specifically, when it comes to power density, power requirements, what they should be thinking about, knowing full well that power density may be something that's mid part of the journey, like in the consideration stage. And we need to make sure that we're filling our funnel with people that are a natural fit for that kind of educational experience, but we need to be able to get them as early as possible. Some of them will intercept successfully at that consideration point, but we also need to understand all of the leading indicators that they're going to get there for these different kinds of buyer personas, for these different kinds of use cases. So if you think that this is something that for sure is multidisciplinary across your whole go-to-market team, and that for sure your chief product officer, your product managers, your CTO needs to be involved in these kind of conversations, you're absolutely positively on the right track. This is very, very, very important to have a highly collaborative, high trust environment, frictionless environment within your own company, and a frictionless experience for your most important prospects and clients. But most of all, it's about changing the culture of your company to get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box once and for all. And in order to do that, your most important segments who are going to need high power density for advanced computing needs to see your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with power density, power requirements for advanced computing. And the way we do that is getting extremely client-centric, extremely empathetic about their biggest goals and challenges, and continue to show up in a way that educates and builds trust with multiple members of those decision committees on an extended period of time. So they keep coming back and learning from you and learning from your internal subject matter experts. So much so that they're spending a lot of those 28 touch points with your company. And that is not only keeping you on the short list, it's starting to gradually start to knock competitive alternatives off of their short list, because they're learning so much from your internal client team members that there's no really reason for them to go elsewhere. So if you're serious about finding data center customers that need high power density for advanced computing, those are some of the most important considerations that you should be thinking about. Getting very client-centric or partner-centric if there's partners involved, and get really, really dialed into what they care about when it comes to advanced computing, when it comes to power requirements, power density, and show up as a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, perhaps even a thought leader when it comes to the most important issues, their biggest goals that they need to achieve individually, as a team, as a company, and what's driving them nuts, what's stressing them out the most, what's messing with their work-life balance, what's screwing up their vacation, what's stressing them out, what's causing them to look up at the sky many times and wonder, what the heck are we doing here? To the extent that you can offer solutions based on what has worked for other companies and best practices, and you're the one that's providing this amazingly helpful, immersive professional development experience, you earn your way in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right kind of game-changing context to get you out of transaction mode, get you out of vendor mode, and into trusted advisor mode. That's the key to being able to find data center customers that need high power density for advanced computing. And that was the final question that we're going to be tackling in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you got good value from this week, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have an idea for an upcoming topic you'd like to see addressed in an upcoming show, make sure to leave that in the comments. And if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you are subscribed to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter, which you can do so. That comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. If we're not currently connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connect invitation, mention you watch the show, and I would be delighted to be connected with anyone who's a big fan of this show on LinkedIn. So until next time, we look forward to seeing you back again for the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. Have a great week. Wishing you great success in helping you and your team capitalize on these enormous growth opportunities in data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. Take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.